Hey, thanks for checking out the project. I've been getting a lot of positive feedback on it. I'm really glad that it helped, and it was really exciting to see a lot of people using it as well. However, few developers were facing some issues with it, and one of my goals with this project was to make setting up GraphQL focused full stack application easier for developers. So I decided to make this video, briefly going over it. You can read more about the project on GitHub. Make sure to leave a star for support if you like it, and I'm available on Twitter at @current6864. Let's get started. All right, let's clone the repo. I'm gonna go here and do a copy and do git clone and wait for it. Let's open it in VS Code, new window, full Starterkit. Okay, let's now check out the README for some next steps. I'm gonna go here and getting started. Looks like we need to create a .env file for both backend and web following the .env template. Let's do that. I'm going to go to the web and create a .env file, then copy this and then paste it here. I'm going to do the same for backend. Create a .env file, copy the template and paste it here. Let's set the node env to development. And also make sure to use your own database URL if you have already started a project, as this might be changed or removed in the future. Let's install the dependencies. I'm going to open a new terminal and I'm going to do yarn. I recommend using yarn. It's a great alternative to npm, and this project uses it heavily. And it's also going to install all the dependencies for the workspace using this post install hook. Let's start the backend. I'm going to open a new terminal and do yarn start backend. Awesome, the backend is up, and now let's start our front end as well. I'm going to do yarn start web. Great, hopefully this should get you started, and now let's check out the code. I'm going to close this. I want to start with the linting setup. We are using ESLint and Prettier. I like to set up shared linting across all the projects. Here are some additional rules for React. And we are also using a bunch of plugins for import aliases. If you're not familiar with aliases, they basically help us clean our imports. Here's an example. Let's go here. And I'm going to try to import something from, let's say, GraphQL. GraphQL from packages, GraphQL. We can, as you can see, we can replace it with something like alias of @backend GraphQL. This is kind of a convenience. It might not seem important right now, but as the project grows, it becomes really annoying to, manage the imports. So this will probably help. And finally, we are also using Husky to fix our lint in post commit hooks. And that's it for the linting setup. Okay, let's start with the backend. Let's go here. It's a pretty basic Express setup. We are using Apollo server here along with vanilla HTTP server for GraphQL subscriptions. Nothing special going on here really, so let's check out the backend packages. Let's start with our database package. I'm gonna go here, go to schema or Prisma. I'm using Prisma here. If you're not familiar with Prisma, Prisma is an open source database toolkit and it provides type safe access to our database. It's really great, you should check it out. Let's go to the service. Here we are initializing the Prisma client using the singlet pattern. To make sure we have a single instance of the client, this should also eliminate unnecessary connections to our database, which might impact the performance. We'll also see how this will help in testing afterwards, and also the dependency injection in GraphQL server. Database package can be abstracted in a better way, but as all the projects don't use Prisma, it should be easier to switch it up. And that should be it for the database package, and let's get going. Okay, let's check out the utils, and let's start with the logger. I'm using Winston, which is a great logging library, and it uses this powerful concept of transports, which are basically storage devices for our logs. You can see I'm using good old file system transport here for now, and it writes logs to this folder. Let's go back. I'm also using the console transport during development. It basically prints logs to the terminal. You can use it in production if you like, or you can integrate with some of the major platforms out there. Platforms like Google BigQuery, AWS CloudWatch, Azure, Redis, and many more. And similar to the database package, we are making sure to initialize a single instance of the logger as well. Let's check out the env.ts. Here we are requiring the .env package, which basically reads from our .env file, and we include it by doing a direct import right here. So when our server starts, the variables are initialized. I think that's it for the utils package, and let's move on. Finally, the GraphQL package. Let's start with the schema organization. I'm going to go here. Here we are defining all the major types and entities in our GraphQL schema. Let's check out the user type as an example. As you can see, we have types.graphql, where we are defining the user type, queries.graphql for the queries focused on the user type. Similarly, we can also define mutations and subscriptions as well. Let's go here and check out the queries and type resolvers. Okay, let's close this. And here's how we are importing and merging the GraphQL definition files. We finally export the schema for the Apollo server config, which is right here. And we are also using dependency injection in GraphQL context so that our resolver can have access to Prisma and Logger services like we discussed earlier. The advantage of using this sort of folder structure is that it can be easily scaled up using things like Apollo federation. Let's move on to the GraphQL API. So the API also follows a similar folder structure as the schema for defining the GraphQL operations. We can look here, get user. Later we'll also see how these GraphQL operations will be helpful in CodeGen. Okay, let's go back. This is the GraphQL API abstraction. Basically, it helps us with the seamless access to a GraphQL API for testing or serverless environments like Lambda or Google Cloud Functions. Finally, let's take a look at how we are using the GraphQL code generator end-to-end. Let's close this and let's open the codegen.yaml file. In this YAML file, we are importing all the documents, and we are using different plugins like Schema AST, TypeScript, React Apollo, which merges and generates type for both backend and web, and they can be found here. Schema types or operations.tsx. That should be it for the GraphQL package, and let's move on to testing. Let's start with the testing. For the testing setup, we are using Jest. And before we check out the database and GraphQL tests, let's go to the utils first. This test suite utils class helps us with setting up Jest and our services like Prisma for database, Logger, and GraphQL API. As we can see in the constructor, we use test suite type enum to initialize the utils for database or GraphQL API testing. We also override the afterall method from Jest to run cleanups for any test documents created during the testing and disconnect our database as well. And finally, we also have reusable methods for creating test documents. Okay, now let's go to the database tests. Here we are initializing our test suite utils with a type database, and we are also using the reusable input methods we created earlier. As for the test, it's pretty standard. We just create a new document and check if the created document matches the input. Similarly, let's go to the GraphQL tests. Same thing as before, we're initializing the test with utils, but this time with the type of GraphQL. And we use our convenient GraphQL API we created earlier for testing. And lastly, we can use the yarn test command to see everything in action. Let me open a new terminal and go to backend and do yarn test. Okay, seems like everything is working. I think they should cover the backend, and now let's move on to the web. Web is pretty simple. It's a standard create React app project with material UI. We are also using React app rewire to override webpack config without ejecting, and config can be found here. Here we are adding fast refresh and path alias plugin to the webpack config. I will probably remove the fast refresh as it comes out of the box in create React app version 4. As for the GraphQL setup, let's go here. We are using Apollo client with subscription support, and we also have operations which we code generated earlier using our API definitions as well. And finally, we are using React testing library with Jest for testing components. I think this is pretty much it for the web setup. Last but not the least, CI setup with Github actions should be here. This is a quite simple setup, so we basically have two jobs running on Ubuntu whenever a push or pull request event occurs. In the test step, we are checking for linting and test errors, and we also provide the database URL from our GitHub secrets. The build step just checks the source branch of the event and builds everything accordingly. And that's it. I think we're done. Hopefully this overview gave you some insight about the project. Feel free to reach out on Twitter if you have any questions, and as always, contributions are welcome. Alright, have a nice day.